learn to improve conversions and generate more leads with the video podcast at marketingoptimization.tv.
Hi, and welcome to Marketing Optimization with Alex and Science. I'm your host, Alex Harris, and today we're chatting with Nathalie Nahai, the web psychologist. How you doing, Nathalie?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Excellent. It's actually funny today that actually the conversion conference is actually going on, and I'm speaking with one of the previous speakers, right?
Yeah, I've spoken there. I think I might be speaking at one in Vegas next year with Tim Ash, so we shall see.
Oh, good. Yeah, I love all those guys. Just got back from the Call to Action conference with Ollie Gardner, and I went to the Hero conference. So I'm making the rounds, really meeting all the speakers.
Ollie's really nice. I met him at Search Love yesterday. The Distilled guys are putting on fantastic bloke, really great speech.
Yeah, love Ollie Gardner. Awesome. To get started, what would be your definition of optimization, and why is it beneficial?
Okay, so optimization is, well, from a psychological angle, of course, is figuring out how best to meet the goals and the motivations of your customers, of your people. So it's not just about optimizing website elements, copy, content, etc. to get certain behaviors. It's also optimizing the psychological experience that you're giving people. So what are some of their implicit motivations, explicit motivations? How can you encourage them to connect with you on a deeper level around common values, etc.? So all of these things have to be considered when you're creating any kind of experience, including obviously online.
Yeah, I'm really interested in your perspective and your approach, because I'm a designer as well, and I've been doing conversion rate optimization for a while. And whenever I tell people to do that I do that, they're always really surprised that I do the qualitative research, and I look into analytics, and then I build out the hierarchy of the customer journey based on that. Can you give us a little bit of overview of your background and how you got into become the web psychologist?
Sure. So originally I trained in psychology. I did a BSc at Birmingham and then went straight to art college, which is what I always wanted to do. Spent a year doing the foundation at Central St Martin's, which is one of the colleges in London, and then started an art degree. Quit after a year and a half because it was conceptual art, which is basically watered down psychology with none of the academic rigor. So I know they would shoot me for saying that, but that's basically what mine was. Quit. I went to the States where I have some family, recorded 2 albums. I play violin and guitar, and I write and compose and stuff. And then it was through that I ended up learning how to design and code websites. So just, a bit of CSS, HTML, Dreamweaver, all of that. Just because I didn't want to have to pay some dude to design my website every 2 years for my music business. So the music didn't really take off in the way that I wanted to. I hit 26 and I thought, right, well, people have started asking me to do their website. So I kind of accidentally became a freelance designer. Mm-hmm. And then at a certain point, I realized I kind of thought, well, why wouldn't we match up designs with behavioral science knowledge to create more intuitive, more compelling, more persuasive websites? So I started looking for books. There weren't any good ones on the subject, so I decided to write my own one, which came out almost 2 years ago today, actually. So Webs of Influence, and then set up the idea of this concept, web psychology, and the web psychologist came to be. That's kind of it, really.
Yeah, well, I love the perspective. Actually, my wife's a psychologist, and
oh, cool.
So we're complete opposites. So she's giving me the psychology perspective, and I on the art design perspective, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. In one of your talks, you talk about persuasive copy, engaging images, viral videos. What would be some of the steps that you would follow to figure out the web psychology of a design?
I think really what it comes down to is having a really keen understanding of your audience. So you mentioned already about the qualitative research. Mm-hmm. Absolutely brilliant. I think, as practitioners, we can't really emphasize that enough, that it's really important, along with all the data and along with being able to map behavioral patterns through the data, to also have the qualitative side. To say, okay, well, this is what the data suggests, and these are some of the things that we understand motivate our customers. So is it that they want a brand that they can identify with at a values level? So for instance, Tom's shoes or various other brands that you find, or is it something that they want that's more transactional in nature? So do they want, say for instance on Amazon, just the best prices, the quickest delivery, etc. So whatever you're doing online, it has to have a qualitative element, and whatever you're creating in terms of content has to speak to the deeper needs of that customer and that audience. And I think by starting there, you also have to realize that you're not creating content for everyone. You're creating content for a very specific person or people or demographic. And to understand what motivates that group in particular, I think is really important.
Yeah, actually, as I've really fine-tuned my conversion process, I think that's probably one of the biggest aha moments I had. Watching people go through user testing, listen to the specific language that they use, and they will tell you what they don't like about the site and what's causing them maybe not to actually convert. Do you go through a process to really understand those customers better and their pains and their problems?
I don't do that anymore, thankfully, because I find the implementation stuff. I get quite bored of this. And also, it's not my specialty. My specialty is more kind of figuring out the patterns in the research and then packaging that in a way that's useful for people. But yes, I do know people who will go through that process, and I advise them on the things to look out for, to investigate, and then they will go ahead and do the implementation. So, for instance, if I'm working with larger clients, I'll train their marketing and e-commerce teams in web psychology principles to go and test. So for instance, A/B split test, I'll say, okay, well, if this is your goal, given the demographic and psychographic information we have about your customers, this is what research suggests might be effective. Let's design some tests to make sure that these assumptions are correct, and then bank that knowledge so that we're not just doing the same test over and over in years to come when we already have all this psychographic information that's piling up. I don't know if does that answer your question.
No, absolutely, because the next step that you talk about in your process is that communication with persuasiveness. And me, I've kind of followed Brian Eisenberg's persuasion architecture and different people who talk about that. Can you give us your perspective on persuasion online?
Yeah, I think the golden rule for persuasion online is really understanding, I know I'm reiterating again, really understanding the perspective of your customer and then reflecting back to them in language that they understand or in content that they understand. So for instance, research has found that in a party or in a conference, when you don't know anyone, you'll tend to gravitate towards people who are similar to you, who exhibit similar linguistic patterns, so the same words, the same kind of clothes you might wear. So I noticed, for instance, you're wearing a Moz t-shirt. If you go to Moz or you speak at Moz, you'll see that most people in the audience, at least this year and the last year, were wearing plaid shirts. Most of them were blue and white. Now, this is not something that people do on purpose, but we identify with our peer group and then we give off signals to show other people who are similar to us, you're part of our tribe. So one of the key messages around communicating persuasively online is to figure out what are those key signals. So the gestures, the non-verbals, the verbals, what kind of cultural references you can make, and then be able to reflect that back in a way that's natural so that people can relax. Essentially, you're trying to get the limbic system in the brain to just go, okay, this is a safe environment. I trust this person. I'm going to be more open to their message, whatever format that takes, whatever content.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, that conscious moment that they first arrived, that first impression, that value proposition, the message match, as many people talk about, and really just to not make people think. They're there in the right place for their need at the right time to get them to move forward. And the next step would be to, sell with integrity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So the third step, yes, once you understand who you're targeting and you know how to communicate most persuasively, then the selling with integrity piece is around being able to apply some of the persuasion principles that you've talked about, and like the choice architecture, or could be any of Cialdini's countless principles, any of these things, to enable people to get to where they want to go more quickly. But the integrity piece is really important because when you're talking about persuasion, you're talking about shaping someone's choices. And we all like to make our own choices. We all like to feel like we have that freedom. And I think freedom is super important. So the way that I perceive persuasion is that you're helping a customer make a decision that's going to benefit them and benefit you. But of course, this is very contentious because there's a lot of people that I know and people that I've met in the internet marketing businesses that will do whatever they need to do to get people to buy into something. And the problem with that is that if it isn't benefiting that customer, essentially you're manipulating them, which could work in the short term. But if you do it over a longer period of time, these people will have their trust in you eroded. You're not benefiting them. And it's basically just a bad idea. It's a bad ethos. So whether you're persuading people for good out of integrity or out of business sense, the idea really is to only ever do it if there's mutual benefit that stems to arise from it.
Yeah. And so now we've talked in, kind of like high level specifically about, the psychology and knowing the customer, communicating, and then selling with integrity. Now let's talk about specifically, my favorite subject, which is actually design. And probably one of the most popular topics I always know on the web is always, color. What color to use. Is it the right for me? Should I, stick with the cool colors and trust in blue? How does color really play into the actual design?
Okay, so I'm glad that you asked that. In the research for the book, I found out really quickly that actually color is incredibly culture specific. So there are so many blogs, and this pissed me off a lot when I was doing my research, just because it was the hardest part of the book to write. Not because it's that interesting compared to other stuff, which it kind of is, but just because there's no consensus. So you'll read on different blogs, orange does this and black does this. The only conclusive or closest to conclusive research that was found was that red and blue are the only colors to have pretty much almost universal impact and influence on people's behaviors, or states of mind, actually. So, for instance, red is typically a viscerally arousing color, whether that's sexually arousing, physically arousing. It's related, whatever culture you look at, to do with physicality. So that might be sex in some cultures. It might be ovulation. It might be physical war. It might be courage. It might be anger. So very physical related states. And when you've got it on websites, of course, your eyes are going to perceive that as an active, arousing color, and it calls for some kind of physical action. Blue, on the other hand, by and large, tends to calm down the nervous system. So we tend to trust people who are either wearing blue or using blue more fully. So, for instance, if you look at all the different financial sectors in the US, the banks, or you look at for example, all the social media platforms, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, most of them tend to go for blue. So you have the Pinterest and others that maybe go for red. But so those are the two ones. So where red is arousing, blue is calming, typically. Anything else that you're going to use, you have to think about the cultural context. So, for instance, orange is not a particularly globally popular color, and yet in the Netherlands, it's their national color. So if you're doing something that's specific for the Netherlands, you might want to take that into consideration. And the list kind of goes on.
And then moving into, testing different call to actions, the classic, test. What color should I test for my particular call to actions? I think it comes down to basically just as long as it's complementary and the call to action is of, a focus point, then, that's really. Have you seen anything kind of related to call to actions, red versus green or orange?
I think the key, so colors in and of themselves are not necessarily the things to focus on. I think the things that you tend to find is that, as you say, it has to complement the palette, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be the same color. So typically, high saturation colors for buttons and high contrast with the surrounding design of the site. So say, for instance, you have a blue website, pale blue, white content, like a white page, whatever, then you'd want to have something that's probably red or orange or pink or something that's in contrast with the blue. If you have a red site, you might want to go for blue as the button. So there's no hard and fast rule, but typically high saturation, high contrast buttons tend to attract the most visual attention because they're the ones that are most different from their surroundings. And the brain looks for visual difference as points of interest. So it's that contrast that really calls our attention to those specific visual elements.
Yeah, and we've talked about, the psychology and now, a little bit of design. Now let's kind of combine the two together in maybe a conversion optimization plan. So I saw one of your courses how you go through how to actually increase sales using psychology. Is there like a framework that you follow aside from gathering the qualitative data, actually implementing A/B tests or maybe some specific tests that people could try on themselves?
Yes, so there are many different things you can do. If you're interested in designing kind of behavior chains, then the best person to look at who's done amazing amounts of work on this is BJ Fogg, because he has an entire system around motivation that you can look at. And that's for longer term sort of adoption of a particular platform. There's another person I'm going to recommend, Nir Ayal, who wrote the book Hooked, which is coming out. Fantastic guy. He talks about creating habit-forming products. So again, there's a sales element there. The one thing that I think is useful for people to test are different persuasion principles. So the one that gets cited a lot are the six principles by Cialdini. So things like social proof, reciprocity, blah, blah, blah. But what's really interesting is that there's at least 125 different kinds of persuasion principles that you can use. And that includes things like sort of economic principles. So the idea of anchoring prices, or the power of three, or the use of charm numbers, or what else can you have? So price value heuristic. We tend to value that which is of a higher price as a higher value. So I think what I would start by saying is have a look at these different models. If you're looking at testing specific things, see if you can test on a landing page maybe the social proof call to action versus a likeness call to action versus a scarcity call to action. That I find to be the most interesting stuff, because people will respond to the copy or to, for instance, the numbers. So 500 people like this on Facebook, etc. I feel like I'm rambling here. There's a shit ton of information. Probably start with the one that's easiest to implement, because then it gets you into a cycle, and then you can just build up your knowledge base. Yeah, no silver bullet. Sorry.
That's cool. And actually, she has a great podcast herself. So if you want to check it out, what's the URL of the podcast?
Oh, good question. If you search on iTunes, The Web Psychologist, it will come up. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Dirty. Or you can just find it on my website, thewebpsychologist.com, and it's in the podcast section. Yeah, every Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to hear more of this, definitely check out her podcast. So now a lot of people ask me about price testing, and I've done a lot of price testing in the past. It's it's just my clients don't allow me to create case studies, particularly about that topic. So a lot of psychology goes into the order of pricing, how price is displayed, sales pricing. Is there any ideas on tests on how people can test their price?
Yeah, so it depends on really what you want to do, but I'm not sure how familiar your viewers are with things like anchoring, for instance. But so this is a really nice example. Say, for instance, I say to you, okay, how many countries beginning with A do you find in Africa? And you had to make a judgment. And if I say, for instance, and actually I don't know, my geography is not my strong point, so please forgive me. But if I say, okay, well, there's 20, for instance, or some random number, that will then influence your perception of whatever number I give you next. So I say, okay, well, how much is a bottle of red wine? Your number would be closer to 20 than if I asked you a question, all right, how many people live in London? You might say 7 million or whatever it is. And then if I said, okay, well, how much is a bottle of red wine? Then your value would shift up. So it's this weird idea that whatever number, and it's completely arbitrary, which shows that we're so not rational, whatever number you give people to think of first of all will affect their subsequent judgment of value and of the subsequent number. So this is why things like if you're doing an event or you're selling a product and you say, okay, RRP is £300, but we're going to give it to you for 160. Then you've anchored them at that higher number first, so then the perception of value shifts accordingly. So anchoring is one particular way. There's, can I give a tip, like a book that I think is really good that they can look at?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to see her getting the book, you have to go over to marketingoptimization.tv.
Oh, no. All right, hold on. So this one, which is written by a friend of mine, Lee Caldwell, who's absolutely brilliant. It's called The Psychology of Price by Lee Caldwell, and it's published through Crimson. This one's a really, really good book. There's a couple of others that are pretty good. There's another one called Priceless, which I can't find on my site, on my thing. Anyway, the other one is called Priceless. Both of these are really interesting, and they dig much deeper into the psychology of pricing tactics and things.
Oh, good one. Awesome. I'll definitely have to check that one out. Now, moving our price into maybe, social proof, trust and privacy. It's definitely important in, all aspects of the web, but especially, e-commerce. I know people right now are setting their sites up for the end of the year, holiday season. How can you really improve trust on your checkout processes and your landing pages?
Okay, so landing pages, one thing that we found is really, really effective at increasing trust, especially now that people have, higher speeds, is a video of your business, of the people who run your business, who work for you, or testimonials of real clients. So high quality enough for it to look legitimate and that you care, but not so high quality that you're giving people too much of a slick sales pitch. And I think finding that balance is quite tricky, but it's really important. So the first thing that increases trust and conversion, video or authentic employees and authentic testimonials. Another thing that's really helpful for checkout processes, which most people do now as best practice, is to chunk it down into very small tasks. So for instance, when Carl Rush, he was the guy that was sort of heading up the Obama donations website and various things, when he ended up testing the best formula for getting people to donate, he found that actually when you broke up the donation cycle, so the payment section, into small manageable chunks, they had much more in terms of the amount that people donated and many more people who decided to sign up. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that you can do. Break it down in smaller steps, pinpoint how far along the journey people have come, and that will tend to help increase conversions and make it easier for people. You want to make it easy for people to go where they want to go.
Yeah, you can't assume in that customer journey that they know where to go. Sometimes you just want to blatantly tell them, this is how many steps left and exactly where to go.
Make it easy for them.
Yeah, now one of the things that we've been really testing these days on landing pages, especially in e-commerce, because it's a little bit of a different approach, is taking those ratings and reviews from those item pages and moving them specifically to the landing page. So you'll wait about a landing page that you arrive on. It's specifically about that one product. We display in some type of iframe a list of those ratings and reviews. It really has we were actually testing on one of my clients those reviews above the fold versus particular social proof icons. And right now the actual ratings and reviews are actually winning. So definitely worth testing ratings and reviews versus social icons. Lots of good stuff to try here for sure. So before we close out, let's tell people a little bit about you, how to find out more about you and what you have going on.
Okay, so I am very avid avid Twitter user. You can tell my language is failing me. It's because I've had 3 days of conference and my brain is still whiskey addled. That sounds really bad. Anyway, right, Twitter, at the website. You can find me on there. Tweet to me. I'm on there pretty much most of the time. Also, my website, thewebpsychologist.com. That's where I have my podcast. Loads of free videos. I'm on SlideShare. I'm currently writing a new book. I am 5,000 words in, and that's going to be about the covert psychological and social engineering structures that influence our behaviors online, but it's much more kind of macro as opposed to the previous one, which was business. And then I'm going to be launching a course in January, which is going to be an online course in web psychology. So if you're interested, just drop me a line or find me on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll definitely follow up with you to promote the course for you in January as well.
Oh, thank you. Good.
So to close out, what would be one thing optimizers can do to use web psychology to really increase their conversion rates?
Get the book or read my slides on SlideShare. If you don't want to pay any money, go have a look at the slides. Everything I do is fully referenced. And I think really it's because most of us, like you do, you already apply a lot of this stuff to your work. So I think rather than reel off a list of things to do, I would say have a look at what's out there, either through the slides or videos or the book if you want to get the book, and figure out what are the areas that you're really not tapping into, and then start applying some of those principles and test them. Because I guarantee there are so many things that you could be doing to increase your conversions. And just to contextualize your work. You guys are designing the shape of the future. Let's do it well. Yeah,
definitely check out her SlideShare. SlideShare.net, Nathalie Nahai. She talks about the science of online persuasion, psych principles for you to A/B test, the psychology behind persuasive storytelling. Oh yeah, she's got a lot of ideas here. Definitely to check out. Well, thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for watching the Marketing Optimization Podcast with Alex Designs. Please remember to subscribe to all of the videos in my YouTube channel. Thank you.